Before this story continues, I need to make one thing clear. What you are about to hear is a fictional story created for entertainment and education. Every character, rank, unit, and event is invented, and does not represent any real person or organization in the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard. This story does not share real military information and does not encourage violence, hatred, or harm. It is told with respect for honor and dignity. If you are a woman who has stood behind a military family, who stayed quiet, who carried more than people noticed, stay with me to the end. And if this story reaches you, share what you feel in the comments, or follow the channel for more stories for strong hearts that rarely get heard. And now we return to the room where everything broke. If you have ever lived inside a military family, stay to the end and leave USA in the comments. My name is Maris Hale, 25. Rick Donnelly is my stepfather, 58, a man who defines honor in a way that always puts him on top, then uses that definition like a stick. Elise Donnelly is 29, close enough to the defense world to recognize what should not be named in public. My mother, Cora, is 52, and she survives by calming storms before they touch the neighbors. Addison is 26, the golden child raised on praise and exemptions. We are in Norfolk, Virginia, the kind of place where salt sits in the air and people clap for speeches about service because many of them have lived it. The microphone clicked tonight. My name carried across the room, not for applause. Rick smiled like he was about to honor someone. Then he tilted his head and said, "Maris, stand up. Let them see you." I stood. He kept the mic close, sponsor board, smooth charity night smooth, like the room belonged to him. Then he delivered it with a light laugh as if it were harmless. "She is a disgrace." I felt the word land on my skin before it reached my ears. A few people released uncertain chuckles, the kind that ask permission. My mother did not look up. Addison lowered her eyes as if she had practiced looking innocent while being protected. "If you hate watching a service member disrespected in public, tap. Like, so I know you stand with honor." Rick lifted his free hand toward Addison, the daughter he always presented as proof that his household was fine. "Now that is pride," he said. "That is the kind of daughter you want at your table." His eyes returned to me and his smile sharpened. "Some of us bring value. Some of us bring problems." My throat tightened, but my face stayed still. Veterans in the crowd were not drunk or reckless. Most were older, careful, and tired of cheap drama. That is why this cut so deep. Rick was using the language of respect to strip it away. If you have ever watched family weaponize honor, you will want to hear how I took mine back by the rules they claim to live by. The first escalation was words. Rick leaned into old habits and polished them for an audience. "Always dramatic," he said, as if my silence were a performance. "Always hiding behind excuses." He glanced at the empty chair beside me and added, "and always alone." The second escalation was action. He nodded toward an event staffer, and the man stepped close with polite hands that still pushed space around me. I heard Rick say, "Keep her away from the stage area. We do not need distractions." The staffer guided me toward the outer tables like I was a spill that needed to be contained. The third escalation was honor. Rick raised his voice just enough for the front rows. "Some people come here wearing the idea of service," he said. "But respect is earned. Some people have not earned a seat among real veterans." The room cooled. Glasses stopped clinking. A white-haired man near the dance floor set his drink down too carefully. I kept my shoulders square and my eyes forward because the last thing I would do was beg for belonging in a room full of people who understood what dignity costs. Then the doors opened. Elise stepped in with a simple dress and an alert posture that did not match the music. She was smiling at someone behind her until her gaze found me. The smile dropped as if it had been cut. She stopped so hard the person behind her bumped her shoulder. Elise stared at my hands, my wrist, the small habit I have of rolling a plain ring once when I am counting exits and cameras. Her face drained. "Dad," she blurted, too loud, too raw, "that is the ghost." The sound of that call sign hit the room like a switch. Conversations died mid-breath. Someone near the bar whispered, "What did she say?" Elise clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with immediate regret, as if she could pull the word back in. I did not raise my voice. "Elise," I said, "do not say that here." The staffer froze. Rick stood at the microphone, still smiling, but the smile had lost its roots. And that was the moment everything began to turn, even before anyone understood why. This is where it began. 2 weeks earlier, late April 2026, Chesapeake, Virginia. Late April 2026 did not begin with shouting or slammed doors. It began with quiet rules, the kind that only exist in households where control has been practiced for years. Chesapeake in spring smelled like cut grass and damp air, and my mother's house looked the same as always from the outside: trimmed hedges, flag folded correctly by the door, no sign of tension. Inside, the temperature dropped in ways the thermostat could not explain. Rick liked order that bent around him. When I arrived with my duffel bag, he glanced at it once and said nothing, which was how his first escalation always started. Silence that demanded correction. At dinner that first night, I spoke only when spoken to. I answered questions with facts, not feelings. Rick watched me with the patience of someone waiting for a mistake. When my mother asked if I wanted more potatoes, I shook my head. Rick leaned back and said, always dramatic, even when no one asked for a performance. I did not respond. That was enough for him. You see, he added, tapping his fork lightly, she does this thing where silence is supposed to mean depth. It just means attitude. Addison smiled politely the way you smile when you have learned that agreeing keeps the room calm. My mother reached for the serving spoon and changed the subject. The second escalation came later that night, quieter, more practical. Rick stood in the hallway and said the guest room was not available. Plumbing issue. He did not look at me when he said it. The laundry room is fine for a night or two. There is a couch. I nodded and carried my bag past the family photos, past the frames where Addison appeared in every season of Achievement. The couch smelled like detergent and old fabric. I lay there listening to the house settle, counting the hums and clicks, mapping exits out of habit. The washer door reflected a thin slice of my face, calm contained. In the morning, Rick stepped over my feet as if I were furniture and said, "You could have gone home. No one asked you to stay." When I did not answer, he shook his head. Always dramatic. The third escalation was sharper because it touched the one thing he claimed to respect. We were in the kitchen, sunlight cutting across the counter, the radio low with local updates. I caught a phrase through the static brief window changed. It was nothing to anyone else. To me, it was information that needed filing away. Rick noticed my attention drift and smirked. "Still pretending that work of yours is important." He said the word service like it was a costume. "All PR if you ask me. If it mattered, there would be medals. No medals means ordinary." Addison looked down at her coffee. My mother inhaled and let it out slowly. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes, not tears, just heat, and I pressed it down. The radio announcer mentioned a name, a local officer involved in a traffic advisory. I recognized it. I had met him once years ago, briefly, in a room where people did not exchange last names. I did not say this. Instead, I wiped the counter and put the mug in the sink. Rick laughed, once short and satisfied. "See," he said, "she knows when she is caught." That afternoon, he escalated again, this time by planning ahead. He mentioned the veteran fundraiser in Norfolk as if it were an afterthought. Sponsor board expects families to show unity, good optics. He looked at me, then finally direct. "You will come. It helps the image. You do not have to say anything. Just stand where I tell you." That was the moment the pattern crystallized for me, the value point that changed how I carried myself through the rest of the week. Rick did not argue to win. He narrated to win. He built stories about who mattered and who did not, then placed people inside those stories until they behaved the way he needed. The household ran on narrative, not truth. Once I understood that, I stopped trying to correct him. I stopped explaining. I stopped hoping for fairness inside a system designed to deny it. I would not fight him in his living room. I would let him build the stage he wanted and step onto it when the lights were brightest. That decision steadied me. The days that followed stacked small humiliations like coins. He corrected my posture in front of neighbors. He introduced me as between jobs. He reminded Addison loudly that some people never learn teamwork. Each time I kept my responses minimal, eyes forward, breathing even. I noted cameras when we went out, exits when we sat down, reflections in windows. Old habits do not turn off because you are visiting family. One evening, as Rick practiced his remarks at the dining table, pacing with a pen as a stand-in for a microphone, I checked my phone. A message flashed and vanished quickly, a single line: maintain cover. I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket. Rick caught the motion and sneered, always hiding something. If you were proud of what you do, you would say it. Pride does not require explanation, I thought, but I did not say it. Instead, I looked at the wall where Addison's awards hung and asked if he wanted help carrying boxes to the car. He waved me off. Save your strength for the event. You are going to need it. The night before the fundraiser, my mother sat with me at the kitchen table after Rick went to bed. She spoke softly the way she always did when she wanted peace more than truth. Just do what he asks. It is one night. I nodded and reached for her hand, a small comfort. In my mind, I ran through the space in Norfolk, the ballroom layout I had seen before, the entrances, the sightlines. When morning came, I packed lightly and set my bag by the door. Rick looked at it and said, "You will ride with us. No need to arrive separately." I agreed. Control, I had learned, relaxes people. As we drove, I watched the road and listened to Rick rehearse the cadence of someone certain the room would belong to him. I checked the mirrors and the corners of gas stations when we stopped the reflex automatic. Rick noticed and scoffed, still acting like something might happen. This is a charity dinner, not a mission. I did not answer, because the truth was not that something might happen. It was that something always happens when people confuse honor with power. If you have ever been treated like a guest in your own home, comment "I see you." Late April 2026 unfolded in measured steps, the kind that look ordinary to outsiders but feel precise to those who live by protocols. I woke before dawn on the couch in the laundry room, folded the blanket back the way I had been taught, and slipped outside while the house still slept. The air was cool and wet. I stood on the back step long enough to let my breathing settle and my senses come online. I did not check messages immediately. Discipline first, then information. When I did look, the instruction was exactly as expected and exactly not. Do not engage, maintain cover. It was not a request, it was guidance shaped by risk assessments and long habit. I acknowledged without typing a word, then slid the phone away. The escalation began there quietly because staying invisible had suddenly become harder. By mid-morning, the radio carried a short advisory between traffic updates, and my attention caught on it again, the same way it had the day before. Brief window changed. The phrase was not meant for me, not officially, but it told me the tempo had shifted. I adjusted my plan accordingly and walked to the end of the street to let my legs burn off the extra tension. When I returned, Rick was already awake, coffee in hand, eyes sharp. He watched me move through the kitchen and said nothing, which was his way of testing whether I would fill the space with explanation. I did not. He finally broke the silence with a smirk. "Big day coming. Try not to embarrass us." I nodded and reached for a mug. The second escalation arrived before noon, more direct, still controlled. My phone vibrated once with a check-in that rarely came outside of transit windows. It asked for my location. Nothing more. I answered with a single coded line that confirmed where I was without revealing why it mattered. The response was immediate. Hold, stand by. I did not move for several seconds after that. Standing still is sometimes the hardest instruction. It feels like indecision to people who do not understand the cost of motion. In the driveway, Rick loaded the car and complained about schedules. Addison hovered, offering help. He waved away. My mother smoothed the air with small talk. I scanned the street from habit noting parked cars and sightlines, then forced myself to relax my shoulders so I would not draw attention. When we left, I sat in the back and watched the mirrors. Norfolk came into view with its familiar edges, the water flashing between buildings' banners, fluttering with service logos. My phone stayed quiet until we crossed a certain intersection, then it vibrated again, this time with information that tightened my grip on the seat. The event had a sensitive presence. No name, no explanation, enough to make attendance non-optional. I did not ask questions. I did not argue. I confirmed receipt and requested a local liaison, a routine option that only exists for those cleared to make it. The approval came back with a time and a location to check in discreetly. Power does not announce itself. It appears as access that works. The third escalation was internal, and it mattered because it tested the one line I had promised myself not to cross. Visibility. The liaison met me near the service entrance, a man with calm eyes and an efficient handshake. We spoke in short sentences, nothing recorded, nothing memorable to anyone else. He mentioned a debrief from years back, a line item that had come up again in planning. "Asset we do not name," he said, not looking at me. I nodded once. The phrase carried weight because it came with expectations. Finish the job. Leave nothing behind. He asked if I needed anything. I shook my head. I needed to stay small. As we parted, I adjusted my ring, a plain band I had worn since the days when identity mattered less than reliability. I rolled it once with my thumb, a habit I used when mapping exits and cameras. The ballroom doors were still closed. Inside, staff moved chairs and checked microphones. Outside, donors arrived in careful waves. I took off my jacket and folded it over my arm, exposing the faint scar on my wrist that never quite faded. It was not dramatic. Just a line that told a story to the right eyes. Elise had those eyes. I did not know she would be there until I saw her name on the seating chart tucked into a corner. It explained the reaction I would later see, and the urgency I felt now. Elise had worked close enough to the system to learn its rules. She had sat in rooms where people spoke in hypotheticals and left names out on purpose. She had heard the call sign once in a briefing and watched the room change, watched senior people go still. The ghost was not a person you bragged about. It was a role that existed to keep others safe by staying unseen. I did not want that recognition. I had chosen anonymity for a reason. Fame attracts questions. Questions attract attention. Attention puts people in danger. For years I had kept my head down and my work clean. I had turned down interviews and declined ceremonies. I had learned to accept that being effective meant being forgettable. That was the moral ground I stood on, and it mattered more to me than any applause. As the doors opened and music drifted out, I slipped into position along the side wall, eyes moving, mind quiet. Rick was already in his element, greeting sponsors and shaking hands. He did not notice the liaison step away, or the way staff deferred when he passed. My mother smiled too hard. Addison laughed at jokes that were not funny. I stayed where I was told and did not engage. When Rick began rehearsing his remarks with the microphone, I felt the last piece click into place. This was the stage he had built. He would use it to tell his story. I would not interrupt him. I would not defend myself. I would let the narrative run until it could no longer support its own weight. The radio near the bar murmured another update. I caught the tail end and filed it away. Brief window closing. The instruction to maintain cover echoed in my head, steady and calm. I adjusted my ring again and loosened my grip on my jacket. Elise arrived moments later, posture alert, eyes scanning before she smiled. When she saw me, I recognized the shift immediately, the recognition that comes from shared rules rather than shared blood. I did not want what she would say next, but I understood why she would say it. Because some things once seen cannot be unseen. And because the cost of invisibility is sometimes paid in moments like this, when anonymity collides with family, and the truth steps closer to the light. The ballroom looked like a place built to soften people, warm lights on white linens, flags placed with care along the walls, a low band playing something polite, glasses catching the glow as donors leaned in for quiet conversations. You could hear money moving in the smallest sounds, the clink of ice, the slide of chairs, the murmur of names that mattered. I stayed along the side wall where a liaison would stand if anyone asked a presence without a headline. Rick did not know why I was there, not really. He thought I was there because he ordered it, because he needed a prop to complete the picture of a proud family. He stepped onto the small stage with the ease of a man who believes a microphone is a birthright. The first escalation came dressed as humor. Rick tapped the mic, waited for the room to settle, then smiled at the sponsor board and said, "We all have that one family member who thinks the world owes them respect just for showing up." A few people laughed, uncertain and polite. Someone coughed. I felt the laughter hesitate the way veteran rooms do when the joke smells like cruelty. Rick turned his head slightly toward where he knew I had been guided and lifted his eyebrows as if inviting the crowd to share his private opinion. "There she is," he said, our reminder that service is not a costume. The laugh that followed was thin, the kind that floats and falls fast. The second escalation snapped into place with the speed of a practiced lecture. Rick straightened, voice firmer, and said, "I taught my girls that uniform means something. Some people are not worthy of it. Words like worthy land differently when old veterans are listening." I saw a gray-haired woman near the front tighten her jaw. I saw a man with a cane blink slowly as if he could not believe the direction this was going. Rick leaned on the phrase like it was righteous. "Discipline," he said, "is not optional. Respect is earned. And if you have not earned it, you should not expect a seat at a table built on sacrifice." He had taken a charity fundraiser and turned it into a sermon, then aimed it at me without saying my name again. That was his talent. He could harm you while appearing principled. The third escalation cut deeper because it brought Addison into it, the golden child presented as evidence of his fairness. Rick lifted his hand and waved Addison forward. Addison stepped up with a practiced smile, eyes lowered just enough to look humble. "Now this is pride," Rick said. "This is the daughter who understands what honor looks like." A few people applauded, politely confused about why they were clapping. Rick continued, "Addison has always represented this family with dignity. She is our real success story." The words "real" and "success" hung in the air like a comparison you were not allowed to challenge. That was the double insult. He elevated her in front of veterans, then used that elevation to imply my existence was a stain. I kept my face neutral and my hands steady. I rolled my ring once, slow, not because I was nervous, but because I was counting cameras. I noted the angle of the nearest lens. I noted the staff member near the center aisle with an earpiece. Rick was not only humiliating me, he was trying to record it. The fourth escalation arrived as a command, quiet, but absolute. Rick glanced toward the event coordinator and made a small chopping motion with his fingers. The coordinator approached a staffer near me and murmured something. The staffer stepped closer to my shoulder with a smile that was too tight. "Sir asked that we keep the view clear," he whispered, guiding me backward away from the line of sight of the cameras. It was not a shove. It was worse. It was the polite removal of a person as if she were clutter. I felt the heat rise in my neck, then flatten into cold. I did not resist. I did not argue. Maintain cover, I reminded myself. Do not engage. I let the staffer move me toward a darker edge of the room, closer to the service hallway, farther from the stage. Rick watched it happen and nodded once satisfied. He turned back to the crowd, enjoying his control. He raised his voice again and said, "I know this sounds harsh, but someone has to say it. Family enables weakness when it is too polite to speak the truth." That line got a few nods from donors who liked the idea of tough love people who confuse bluntness with virtue. The band kept playing under him, soft and pointless. Then the doors opened. Elise stepped in. She moved like someone who had learned to enter rooms with awareness, shoulders relaxed, eyes sharp. She smiled at someone to her left, then her gaze lifted and found me. The smile vanished. Her feet stopped. Her body went rigid as if someone had called a number only she understood. She stared at my hands, at the plain ring, at the scar on my wrist that the jacket no longer covered. She swallowed hard. The fifth escalation happened in one breath, accidental and irreversible. Dad Elise blurted, "Too loud, too raw, that is the ghost." The effect was immediate. The ballroom did not erupt, it froze. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. A laugh died mid-sound. Even the band stumbled a chord, hanging wrong before it corrected. Heads turned. People looked from Elise to me, then to Rick, waiting for someone to explain the sudden shift. Elise slapped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with panic, as if she had just spoken a word she was trained never to speak in public. I said it low, steady, and final. Elise, do not say that here. My heart was not racing. It was worse. It was as if it had moved behind glass. I felt no adrenaline surge, no shaking, no urge to prove anything. I only felt cold clarity. This was the cost of being unseen. This was the moment anonymity cracked, not because I wanted it, but because someone else recognized the shape of it. Rick turned toward Elise, confused, still holding the microphone like a weapon he did not realize had dulled. The smile on his face slipped. The crowd began to murmur, not gossip now, but concern. Who is she? What does that mean? Why did she say that? Rick tried to recover with humor the way bullies do when the room turns. Elise, sweetheart. He chuckled, you have been watching too many spy movies. The ghost. Come on. People laughed a little, but it sounded forced, a rope thrown to save him. Elise did not laugh. She looked at Rick like she was seeing him for the first time, then looked back at me with a warning in her eyes that was not personal, it was procedural. Rick tightened his grip on the mic. He scanned faces looking for allies, then leaned into the microphone again, voice harder. We are not doing theatrics tonight, he said. This is a veteran fundraiser, not a stage for attention seekers. He pointed his chin toward me, and the accusation was clear. The room did not follow him this time. The air had changed. Something in veteran rooms is sensitive to the smell of disrespect. It is not sentimental. It is structural. And that is when Owen Pike stood up. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a cane resting against his chair, and a posture that still carried training. He did not speak loudly. He did not wave his arms. He simply stood, waited for the nearest conversations to fade, and said, "This event is not for humiliation." His voice was calm, but it cut through the room because it did not ask permission. He looked at Rick, not angry, not pleading. Principle first. We honor service here, he continued. We do not use this microphone to shame people, not family, not anyone. Rick tried to interrupt. Owen held up one hand, a small stop gesture that carried decades of authority. Not tonight, Owen said, and the room accepted it as a rule. I watched donors nod. I watched veterans straighten in their seats. I watched the event coordinator take a step toward the stage, eyes measuring risk. I watched Rick's face shift, the first real crack in his certainty. He had built a stage to narrate me as weak. He had not expected the room to apply standards to him. Elise stayed frozen by the door, breathing, shallow hand still near her mouth like she was trying to contain damage. The band lowered its volume as if even the music understood that the night had moved into a different court. If you want justice that does not need shouting, hit subscribe, because the next part is where it truly sinks in. Owen Pike remained standing with his hand lowered now, not dramatic, just present, and that presence forced the room to choose a standard. The event coordinator moved with quiet urgency toward the stage, her smile gone, replaced by the calm face people wear when they have to protect the purpose of a room. She leaned toward Rick and spoke into the side of her headset, then addressed him in a voice meant to be respectful and final. Sir, she said, this is a veteran fundraiser. Our policy is clear. We do not allow personal attacks or public shaming of service members or their families. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him of cruelty. She stated a rule, and that made it worse for him because rules do not care about his ego. Rick lifted the microphone as if it could save him and tried to laugh. I was just joking, he said. Lighten up. The coordinator did not laugh. Sir, she repeated, you are in violation. Please hand me the microphone. The first escalation in this act was not yelling or fighting. It was procedure. A staff member stepped to the edge of the stage with an open hand. Another positioned themselves near the aisle to keep the walkway clear. The sponsor board chair, a tall man in a navy blazer with a small lapel pin, rose from his seat and walked forward. His expression was polite, which is sometimes the harshest expression in public. Rick, he said quietly, not tonight. The phrase did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a door closing. Rick's cheeks flushed. He looked around for allies for the donors who had been nodding earlier at his tough love line, but their eyes had shifted away. People suddenly found interest in their glasses, their napkins, their phones. The coordinator held her hand out again. Rick hesitated, then tightened his grip on the microphone like a child refusing to share. The second escalation arrived in the form of choice removed. The sponsor board chair nodded once to the staff member, and the staff member stepped closer, still polite, still calm, and said, "Sir, we need the microphone now." Rick opened his mouth to argue, but the room did not give him oxygen. The veteran tables were quiet, not sympathetic. Owen Pike did not move or gesture. He simply stood there like a reminder of what the night was supposed to honor. Rick's shoulders rose and fell. He finally shoved the microphone toward the coordinator's hand. The sound of it changing hands was small but loud in that silence. The coordinator took it, turned it off, and set it on the podium like it was an object that no longer had permission to speak. Then she nodded toward the aisle. "Sir, please step away from the stage area. You are welcome to remain as a guest if you can respect the event. Otherwise, we will ask you to leave." That was the third escalation. It did not humiliate him with insults. It placed him under the same expectation as everyone else. Rick tried to regain control with volume. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I am family." The sponsor board chair held his gaze without flinching. "This event is not about you, Rick," he said. "Not tonight." A woman near the front, someone my mother had greeted earlier like an important friend, turned her head away from Rick as if she had never met him. Another donor, a man who had laughed at Rick's first joke, stood and walked to the bar without a word, leaving his chair angled out like a statement. The room was full of small withdrawals, the social equivalent of a unit stepping back from a leader who has lost trust. Rick stood on the edge of the stage, suddenly alone in the brightest light. Addison stepped forward as if she could fix it the way she always had, with a smile and a soft voice. "Dad," she whispered. "Stop." Her hands trembled. It was the first time I had ever seen her afraid of the room rather than afraid of disappointing him. She had been trained to believe approval was protection. Now she learned approval cannot shield you when honor collapses in public. Her eyes darted to the sponsor board chair, then to Owen Pike, then to Elise by the door. Addison's face went pale. She finally understood that being the favorite does not matter when the crowd stops following your father. Rick snapped at her under his breath, not caring who heard. "Stay out of it. You are fine." He tried to look confident, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders were tight. His jaw jumped as if he was chewing anger. The fourth escalation came with a sentence from a man in a wheelchair near the veteran tables. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply looked at Rick and said, "Not tonight." The phrase moved through the room like a signal. Another voice echoed it. "Not tonight," then a third. "Not tonight." It was not a chant. It was consensus. And once a veteran room reaches consensus, it becomes iron. Rick glanced toward me, and I felt his attempt to pin blame return the old narrative reflex. "This is her doing." He began pointing without fully pointing. "She is always dramatic, always stirring things up." I did not react. I did not lift my chin. I did not speak. I stayed small because engaging would give him the fight he wanted. The coordinator stepped between Rick and the podium, still calm. "Sir," she said, "you are making it worse. Please step away." Rick's face twisted. Elise took one step forward, then stopped, her eyes locked on me, not on him, as if she was weighing whether she had already said too much. The sponsor board chair turned slightly toward Elise. "You said something," he asked quietly, "something about a call sign." Elise swallowed. Her hand hovered near her mouth again. She looked at the coordinator, then at Owen Pike, then back at me. Her voice came out low, controlled, and afraid of being overheard. "That call sign is restricted," she said. The sentence did not explain anything to most of the donors. It did not need to. It landed with the people who recognized the tone. A man near the veteran tables narrowed his eyes, then leaned toward another and whispered, "If she is here, it is serious." The reply was immediate, also whispered, also calm. "Then this is not a joke." The room shifted again, Not into fear, but into sober attention. No one asked what unit, what operation, what mission. Those questions did not belong in a public ballroom. People who know the culture understand need to know. That was the point. The ghost was not supernatural. It was a call sign that only existed in places with closed doors, and hearing it spoken aloud in a room like this felt like hearing a classified term in a grocery store. Rick did not understand any of it. He scoffed, desperate to make the moment smaller. "Restricted," he repeated loudly. "Please, you think you can scare people with secret words." The sponsor board chair did not look impressed. "Rick, he said you are done. Please leave the stage area now." The coordinator nodded toward the side exit. A staff member opened it quietly, creating a clear path that did not require anyone to touch Rick. The elegance of it was brutal. It gave him no excuse to claim he had been attacked. He had only been removed by standards. Rick stood there a second longer as if waiting for someone to defend him. No one did. My mother's face had gone tight and blank. She did not reach for him. She did not reach for me. She simply stood frozen in the space between the life she performed and the truth she could not deny. Addison's eyes filled not with empathy for me but with panic for herself. Her mouth opened as if to speak, then closed. She realized she could not charm her way out of this. I finally spoke, not to punish, not to explain, but to end the moral confusion Rick had tried to create. "Honor is not something you use to hit people in your own home," I said. My voice was quiet, but the sentence carried because it was plain and true. The room did not applaud. It did not need to. It simply accepted it. Rick's face tightened as if he had been slapped not by a hand, but by a standard he could not twist. He stepped down from the stage area and walked toward the side exit with stiff posture, trying to look like he chose it. He did not look back. The sponsor board chair picked up the microphone, turned it on, and spoke into it with a steady tone. "Thank you for your patience, everyone," he said. "We will continue our program with respect." The band resumed softly. The room began to breathe again. If you believe respect is the minimum comment, respect. The night did not end with a dramatic confrontation in the parking lot or a screaming match in the car. It ended the way real consequences often begin, quietly through social distance and official emails. In the days that followed late April 2026, the sponsor board did what sponsor boards do when they want to protect their mission. They documented. They reviewed. They voted. Rick Donnelly did not get arrested or tackled or publicly cursed. He got something worse for a man like him. He got quietly removed from the circles that had fed his identity. The fundraiser photos went out without him. The thank you list was published without his name. A short statement circulated through the veteran community and the donor network in Norfolk that the event reaffirmed a commitment to respect, and that future participation required adherence to conduct standards. Those words sounded gentle, but everyone understood what they meant. Rick had violated the code of the room. Owen Pike did not have to campaign against him. The standard did it. Within 2 weeks, Rick lost his role on the committee that coordinated local sponsor outreach. A month later, a small contract he had secured through community connections for a logistics vendor did not renew. It was not announced as punishment. It was simply not renewed. People who had once taken his calls let them go to voicemail. People who had once laughed at his jokes greeted him with tight smiles and short sentences, then walked away. Not tonight had become not anymore. My mother tried to pretend it was temporary, a misunderstanding, a bad night that would fade. But Rick felt it in his body. You can see it in a man who is used to being deferred to. He walks into a room expecting eyes to turn, and the eyes do not. He speaks expecting laughter, and the laughter never arrives. He tries to restore himself with louder stories, and the room grows quieter. Addison stopped posting cheerful photos about family pride. She was not evil. She was sheltered. And for the first time she learned that protection is not power. It is a bubble, and bubbles pop when the world applies a rule. I did not celebrate any of it. I did not tell anyone what Rick deserved. I did not spread gossip. I returned to my rhythm because my life had always been built outside Rick's narrative. In early June 2026, I found my peace in small places that smelled like normal life. A coffee shop near the water, not fancy, just clean tables, and a steady hum of conversation. The kind of place where older veterans sit with their backs to the wall without thinking about it, where they talk softly and watch the door because habits stay with you. I became a regular there. The barista learned my order without asking. A retired Navy chief named Lena always claimed the same corner table and nodded at me like a quiet invitation. Owen Pike came in sometimes, cane-tapping lightly, and we would talk about nothing important, the weather, the parking, the way Norfolk traffic never makes sense. Then we would talk about something that mattered. Honor. Not the word Rick used to hit people, but the kind that keeps you steady when no one is watching. Owen told me once that the strongest leaders he knew were the ones who did not need a microphone. Lena said, "Respect is not a speech, it is a habit." I listened more than I spoke. That was my chosen family, people who did not ask me to prove myself. People who recognized dignity without demanding a performance. In those weeks, I kept my boundaries clean. I did not go back to my mother's house. I did not answer Rick's messages because he did send a few, at first stiff and indirect. "We should talk about what happened. You embarrassed the family. You owe an explanation." Then when those did not work, he tried a different angle, softer, almost polite. "Your mother misses you. It would mean a lot if you came by." Still, I did not respond. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is a door you close to keep your life from flooding. On a humid Thursday afternoon in late June 2026, my phone rang with a number I recognized. Not saved, not blocked. I stared at it for 2 rings, then answered because I wanted the truth of what he would say on record in my memory. "Maris," Rick said, and he sounded tired in a way I had never heard. Not reflective, just deprived of an audience. "We need to talk." I did not offer warmth. I did not offer anger. I said, "What do you need?" That question was the first escalation of his return, because it forced him to name his purpose. He paused, and I heard the calculation. Then he said, "There is a situation. The board, the contracts. People are overreacting. They think I violated some rule, but you know how these things are." He spoke like a man negotiating a misunderstanding. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Finally, he pushed forward. "I need you to clear it up. You were there. You are the reason they are treating me like this. If you make a call and tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you are fine, that I meant no harm, they will back off." The audacity was so pure, it almost made me laugh. Almost. He was asking me to fix the consequences of his own behavior. He was asking me to restore the reputation he had tried to build by humiliating me. I said I will not do that. My voice stayed calm. Rick's breathing sharpened. "Come on, Maris. Do not be like that. You know people took it the wrong way." I was making a point about discipline, about respect. You could help your family. That was the second escalation. The request turned into a demand, disguised as principle. When I did not bend, he shifted again. His voice softened, then sharpened at the edges. "Family is family," he said. "You do not leave family behind. You do not let your stepfather fall because of one bad night. Your mother is suffering. Addison is stressed. We are all paying for this." That was the third escalation, the guilt weapon. He invoked family the way he had always invoked honor, as a tool to move me. For a moment, I pictured my mother at the kitchen table, hands folded too tight, always trying to calm the storm. I pictured Addison's panic the first time she realized her bubble was not a shield. I felt a faint pull not toward Rick, but toward the women who lived around his gravity. Then I remembered the laundry room couch, the way he stepped over my feet like I was not a person. I remembered the microphone, the word disgrace delivered like a lesson. I remembered the staffer guiding me away from cameras as if I were something shameful to hide. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult him. I simply held the boundary. "I am not leaving family behind," I said. "I am leaving your abuse behind." There was silence on the line. Rick tried one more push, quieter now, almost pleading. If you do this, I can get my position back. We can move forward. You can come home. The word home landed wrong. That house had never been home for me. I answered with the sentence that ended the negotiation. I am not saving the man who tried to drown me in shame. The line was cold, not cruel, because it was true. Rick exhaled hard. So that is it, he said. You are going to let me lose everything. I did not argue about what everything meant. I did not explain how consequences work. I said you chose this, and I ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a few seconds, listening to the quiet of my apartment, the normal hum of a refrigerator, the steady, distant sound of traffic. My heart felt steady again. Boundaries do that. They bring you back to yourself. A week later, my mother texted me, not Rick, not Addison, Cora. It was short and careful. Can we meet? Just you and me. I stared at the message longer than I meant to. My mother had spent years smoothing storms and calling it love. I did not want to punish her, but I would not return to the old pattern either. I replied with my condition. Yes, public place. No Rick, no Addison. If that is not possible, then no. She answered within a minute. Okay, Saturday. The coffee shop by the water. My chosen place, my chosen rules. That Saturday, my mother arrived early, hands clasped around a paper cup as if warmth could keep her steady. She looked older than she had a month ago, not because time moved fast, but because denial finally met reality. She tried to smile. Maris, she said. I sat across from her and waited. She began with what she could manage. I did not know how bad it was, she whispered. I wanted to tell her she did know. She had seen enough to know. But I also knew that truth can land differently when a person finally stops running from it. I asked, are you here to defend him or to speak for yourself? She flinched, then shook her head. For myself, she said. I am sorry I let you sleep in that laundry room. I am sorry I stayed quiet when he said those things. I am sorry I made peace more important than you. It was not a perfect apology, but it was direct. And for my mother, directness was a new language. I nodded once. Thank you, I said. Then I stated my boundary without drama. If we have a relationship, it will be on new terms. No more minimizing. No more forcing me into rooms where I am treated like a guest. No more using family as a reason to accept disrespect. She swallowed, eyes wet. I understand, she said. I cannot promise I will do everything right, but I can promise I will try. I believed the trying more than the promise. We sat for a while in quiet, watching the window where the water flashed between buildings and the afternoon light moved slowly. Owen Pike walked in and nodded at me, not interrupting. Lena raised a hand from her corner, a small salute of belonging. My mother noticed them, then looked back at me with confusion. Friends, I said. Family in the way that matters. She did not argue. She simply nodded, and something in her face softened as if she finally understood what she had risked losing. When we stood to leave, she asked quietly, "Will you come home sometime?" I answered honestly, "Maybe, but not yet, and not if it costs me my peace." She nodded again, accepting the terms, and that acceptance felt like the beginning of something healthier than forgiveness without change. As I walked back to my car, I felt the strange calm that follows a clean boundary. The world did not need to applaud. The room did not need to shout. Honor had been restored in the simplest way by standards and distance, and the refusal to carry what was never mine. If you have been silent too long to keep the peace, tell one story in the comments. You are not alone.